This video is a brief introduction to phenomenography. Phenomenography is concerned with human conception, with the ideas that we have about things that we experience. So the emphasis is on the content of our thinking. It's about identifying and describing conceptions of a particular phenomenon. This is oftentimes referred to as a second order approach. It focuses on how people think about an experience or a phenomenon rather than the experience or phenomenon itself. The origin of the word phenomenography is from two Greek roots, phenomenon, meaning appearance, and graphene, meaning to write, or in other words, to write about how things appear to us. If you're familiar with Piaget's work, there is some similarity between these two ideas. They're not exactly the same, but there is some commonality. So if you imagine a Piagetian experiment that looked at children's conceptions of the notion of conservation, for example, you would find that there are a limited number of ways in which children conceptualize this concept of conservation. And that's very similar to what phenomenography does. So what is it that we are working towards when we do phenomenography? The intent is to describe what is called an outcome space. And that outcome space includes a couple of things. Most importantly, are these categories of description. And just as in my reference to Piagetian theory, the idea is that there are a limited number of categories of description. And then in addition to look at dimensions of variation among and within those categories. So what does this look like? In terms of data collection, phenomeноgraphers most of the time do in-depth and open-ended interviews with a relatively small number of participants, I would say 20 is pretty common, who share some sort of experience or context. And the intent is to analyze the conceptualizations of that experience or phenomenon. It is not focused on individuals. So we're not looking for variation across individuals. We're looking at the conceptions that those individuals who share some experience can tell us about. In terms of the analysis, I've given you two representations really of how the process works. After the interviews are done and transcribed, that we spend time familiarizing ourselves with the data, but then work towards a condensation, looking for patterns. We look for things that are similar and different so that we can group things ultimately into these categories of difference. And we can describe in some detail what the features of those categories are, and we give them some kind of a name. And as I indicated previously, this all results in what's called an outcome space. So here's an example of what an outcome space might look like. So this is a study that looked at people's conceptions of political information, and you can see there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 categories of description. Now, many studies, phenomenographic studies, may simply stop at the description of these categories. A kind of more sophisticated, when the data permits, analysis is to look at the relationship among those categories of description. And in this instance, the researchers have created a hierarchy with 4 levels of meaning across which these categories of description are framed. That allows for a more kind of theoretical and richer sense, not just the description, but also the interconnections among those categories of description. So you can see that an underlying theoretical idea for phenomenography is that we do learn, we understand, we experience the world through variation. That as individuals, we focus on different characteristics, we look at things in terms of different kinds of magnitude, and it is this variation that allows us to do phenomenography. We anticipate and expect that this fundamental idea of variation is extant in our experience of the world. So the individual who created the term phenomenography is Ferenc Martin, an educational psychologist from Sweden, and his work it really is the genesis of phenomenography as a methodology. He focused on student learning as a particular focus for his own work, but it extends out beyond that. But if you're interested in learning more about phenomenography, beginning with Ferenc Martin's work is an excellent starting point.